Fidelity, the people who hold about half of America's retirement accounts, put out a number a few years ago that's been quietly ruining brunches ever since. By 30, you should have 1 times your salary saved for retirement. Make 70,000, you should have 70,000 tucked away. I remember hearing that number for the first time at a birthday dinner, watching a friend go visibly pale over her second margarita. And I get it. It's a clean, scary, extremely shareable number. It's also, and I say this with love, kind of a setup. So today, I'm giving you the real numbers. What people your age actually have in the bank, according to the Federal Reserve, not according to a headline built to make you feel behind. Then, we're building an actual 24-month plan to close that gap, with the exact dollar amount you'd move every month depending on what you make. So how did an entire generation end up nowhere near a number that a financial company built specifically to be achievable? Let's get into why the number's misleading, why being behind it isn't a personal failure, and what you're actually doing about it starting next Monday. Here's the full guideline because context matters. Fidelity says 1 times your salary by 30, 3 times by 40, 6 times by 50, 8 times by 60, and 10 times your final salary by 67. It's built off-market simulations designed to hold up even in a bad economy, aiming for a 90% chance you're fine in retirement. The number underneath all of it, the one nobody puts in the headline, is that this assumes you've been saving around 15% of your pre-tax income every year since you started working. Not 15% starting now, 15% since your first job out of college, employer match included. Which means the 1 times by 30 stat isn't really describing where you are. It's describing where you'd be if you'd been running a specific disciplined savings plan for a decade already, probably before anyone taught you what a Roth IRA even was. And this is exactly the number that gets ripped out of context and turned into a panic-inducing TikTok by someone selling a course. You'd think a financial planning guideline would get used responsibly. It doesn't. It gets used to make you feel like you personally failed a test nobody told you that you were taking right before the slide, where they offer you their $49 budgeting template. So keep the number. It's genuinely useful as a compass. Just stop using it as a report card on your worth as an adult, because that was never what it was built for. A guideline built by an investment company to help you plan is not the same thing as a grade. And the influencer turning it into one usually has something to sell you on the other side of your panic. One more clarifying note before we move on, because it changes the math. When Fidelity says salary, they mean gross before tax, before anything gets deducted. Not the number that actually lands in your checking account. If you've been mentally calculating this against your take-home pay, you've been holding yourself to a stricter version of the guideline than the one that actually exists. Your actual number, in case you want it, is just your gross annual salary times 1. Make $62,000 a year before tax. Your Fidelity target at 30 is $62,000 saved, combined across every retirement account you have. Not per account, combined. 401k, old employer plans you forgot to roll over, any IRA sitting on the side, all of it added together. Here's the real data. According to the Federal Reserve's most recent survey of consumer finances, the median household under 35 has $18,880 saved for retirement. Total. Not per person making $70,000 a year. The actual median across everyone. And liquid savings. The actual cash sitting in checking and savings accounts, not retirement accounts, comes in even lower. The median for people under 35 is $5,400. The average gets quoted a lot higher, over $20,000. But that's because a handful of very wealthy households drag the average up while doing absolutely nothing for the median household's actual bank balance. That gap between average and median matters more than people realize. You are being compared to a number that includes people who own private planes. That's not a fair fight, and it was never supposed to be one you'd win. And this is the same math error that happens every time you compare your bank account to your friend's vacation photos instead of to actual data. You're not seeing her balance. You're seeing the 15% of her life she chose to post, which tells you nothing about the credit card that vacation might be sitting on. Real numbers from actual surveys of actual households are a far more honest mirror than anyone's feed. Zoom out to total net worth, everything owned minus everything owed, and the median for people aged 25 to 34 sits around $39,000. But that median hides an enormous spread. The 25th percentile is sitting at about $5,000. The 75th percentile is up around $120,000. And the bottom 10% of this age group actually has negative net worth, usually because student loan debt is outrunning whatever assets they've managed to build so far. That negative number isn't a mystery, by the way. It's mostly a timing problem. You take on debt at 22 to get the degree that's supposed to eventually pay for itself. And for a few years, the math looks upside down before it flips. Most people cross back into positive territory sometime in their early 30s, right around when the loans start shrinking and the income starts climbing. If you're currently sitting in that negative range yourself, this is genuinely just where the curve is supposed to be at your age, not a sign anything's gone wrong. The line goes up from here for almost everyone who keeps showing up to their paycheck and doesn't panic decide the whole system is rigged against them specifically. So, if you did the mental math during that first graphic and landed somewhere well under 1 times your salary, take a breath. You are, statistically, exactly where most people your age actually are. The version of normal that gets modeled in these guidelines and the version of normal that most humans are actually living are 2 very different data sets, and only one of them gets turned into a viral graphic. For what it's worth, at 30, I had about $6,000 in a 401k and a brokerage account I'd opened specifically to buy one stock a coworker mentioned at a happy hour, which I then panic sold 8 months later at a loss the first time the market so much as sneezed. So, if your version of behind involves a regrettable single stock purchase, you are in excellent, if slightly embarrassing, company. Here's the part that actually matters more than any single benchmark. Being behind a number at 30 says almost nothing about where you end up at 60, because the majority of your investing lifetime hasn't even started yet. At 30, you've got roughly 3.5 decades left before a typical retirement age. That is the actual resource you're working with, not the $18,000 or the $5,000 sitting in your accounts right now. Time in the market does more heavy lifting than the size of your starting balance ever will. Here's what that actually looks like in dollars. Put $300 a month into an investment account starting at 30, using something close to the market's long-run historical average return. And by 65, you're looking at a balance that can approach $500,000. Market conditions depending, start that exact same $300 a month at 35 instead. And you don't just lose 5 years of deposits. You lose 5 years of the account compounding on top of itself, which quietly costs you more than the missed deposits ever would. Not guilt. Math. I want to be specific about why behind feels so personal, though, because it's not just in your head and it's not entirely the story you'd expect either. Recent data on 401k balances found men's balances running about 30% higher than women's overall. But narrow that down to people earning similar incomes, and the gap nearly closes, women within about 10% of men. Women earning 6 figures were even found to save a slightly bigger share of their paycheck than men at the same income. The overall gap isn't really a women save worse story. It's a women get interrupted more and paid less to begin with story, which is a completely different problem with a completely different fix. Women also take more career breaks for caregiving and still deal with a wage gap that compounds across an entire working life instead of resetting each year. And women tend to live longer in retirement, which means the number you actually need at the end is bigger, not smaller, than the guy in the next cubicle who's never had a single one of those interruptions built into his timeline. And here's the reframe worth sitting with. You don't need to retroactively hit the 30-year-old target. You need to hit the next one. Fidelity's own guideline gives you until 40 to reach 3 times your salary. And closing that gap from wherever you're starting is a completely different, far more achievable project than trying to conjure a missed decade out of thin air. None of that is a discipline problem. Nobody sat you down at 22 with a whiteboard and explained employer matches, tax-advantaged accounts, or why starting 5 years earlier matters more than starting with 5 times the money. Most of us piece this together from friends, a confusing bank teller conversation, or, increasingly, whichever finance account showed up in our algorithm first. And that's the part that should annoy you, if we're being honest. Financial literacy isn't taught consistently in most schools. Retirement accounts are genuinely confusing by design, and the industry has had decades to fix that and mostly chose not to. So no, you didn't personally drop the ball. You inherited a system that assumes information you were never actually given. The fix for that isn't guilt, and it definitely isn't trying to cram 30 years of saving into the next 18 months out of panic. It's a specific, boring, repeatable schedule that starts wherever you actually are right now, with whatever paycheck you actually have right now, and ramps up on purpose instead of all at once. That's the plan we're building next, and it works whether you're making $50,000 a year, $100,000, or somewhere in between. Here's how we actually close the gap without blowing up your budget in month 1. Instead of jumping straight to Fidelity's 15%, which will absolutely make you quit by March, you ramp in 3 stages over 2 years: 5%, then 10%, then 15%, each stage lasting 8 months. There's a reason the ramp works better than the jump, and it's not just about the math being gentler. Behavior research on habit formation consistently shows that small, sustainable changes stick far longer than dramatic ones you white-knuckle through. You're far more likely to still be automating this in year 3 if month 1 didn't feel like a punishment. One quick note before the numbers. If your employer offers a 401k match, claim that match starting today, in month 1, regardless of what phase you're technically in. That's not part of the ramp. That's compensation you've already earned and are currently leaving on the table if you're not contributing enough to get it. Phase 1 runs months 1 through 8 at 5% of your gross pay, automated the day you get paid. On $50,000 a year, that's $208 a month. On $70,000, that's $292 a month. On $100,000, that's $417 a month. Small enough that you barely feel it, which is the entire point of starting here instead of at the scary number. Phase 2 runs months 9 through 16, stepping up to 10%. On $50,000, that's $417 a month. On $70,000, $583. On $100,000, $833. By this point, the 5% habit is already boring, which is exactly what you want a savings habit to become. Phase 3 runs months 17 through 24, landing at Fidelity's actual 15% target. On $50,000, $625 a month. On $70,000, $875. On $100,000, $1,250. You're not leaping there, you're walking there. In 3 steps, over 2 years. Run the full 24 months, and here's what you've actually put away, not counting a single dollar of employer match or market growth on top. On $50,000 a year, $10,000 saved. On $70,000, $14,000. On 100,000, 20,000, add in any employer match and whatever the market did along the way, and the real number lands higher than that for almost everyone. Quick note on where this money actually goes, because a percentage without a destination doesn't do much. Match first into your 401k always. After the match, a Roth IRA is worth opening because you contribute money you've already paid tax on, and it grows completely tax-free from there, including every dollar it earns between now and the day you retire. That's the retirement side. Keep it separate from your emergency fund, which belongs somewhere completely different. A high-yield savings account at a different bank than your checking, holding 3 to 6 months of basic expenses. The interest actually pays you something there, and the slight inconvenience of a separate login is exactly what keeps you from treating it like spare spending money on a rough Tuesday. One honest exception. If you're carrying credit card debt above roughly 20% interest, that debt is compounding faster than almost any investment account will reliably beat. So, it usually wins the math. Keep a small automatic amount running underneath it anyway, even just enough for a $500 starter cushion, so a car repair doesn't send you right back onto that same card. Once the debt's gone, redirect the entire ramp you just built toward your savings instead. If you're self-employed or your income moves around month to month, the percentages still work exactly the same way. You just apply them to whatever hit your account that month instead of a fixed number. No employer means no match to chase, but it also means a SEP, IRA, or a solo 401k is on the table, both built specifically for exactly your situation. Same ramp, same 3 phases, just a different account name on the other end. And once you hit month 24, you don't stop. You either hold steady at 15%, which is the number that gets you to Fidelity's actual guideline over time, or if a raise comes through, you bump it again before your spending has a chance to notice the extra money exists. Most 401k plans will even auto-increase your contribution by 1% or 2% every year, if you turn that setting on once and never think about it again. You don't need a finance degree to run this. You need one automatic transfer, adjusted 3 times over 2 years. That does the discipline for you while you're busy living the actual rest of your life. So back to that scary number from the top. 1 times your salary by 30 was never a report card, and the friend going pale over her margarita was reacting to a stat that was ripped out of its own instruction manual. You now have the real numbers, the median, not the headline, and you know exactly why the gap exists and why it isn't a character flaw. More importantly, you've got a 24-month plan that starts small, ramps on a schedule, and lands you exactly where Fidelity's guideline actually wanted you, minus the part where you panic quit in week 3 because you tried to jump straight to 15% on day 1. You know your dollar amount for each phase, you know where the money goes, and you know exactly what to do differently if you've got debt or irregular income instead of a tidy salary. Your one action item out of this entire video. Set up an automatic transfer for phase 1 this week. 5% on payday before you see the money sitting there tempting you. That's it. Everything else on this ramp happens on autopilot from here. If you found this useful, subscribe, because the same thing that happened with this number happens constantly in personal finance content aimed at women. A real, useful stat gets stripped of its context and turned into something designed to make you feel small instead of informed, right before someone tries to sell you the fix for a feeling they manufactured. I'll keep putting the context back, one overhyped statistic at a time. So you're making decisions off real data instead of a headline built to make you panic click. I'll see you in the next one.